it's very, very good to see that many people have joined from very different places, actually, and not restricted to the UK at all. These are the joys of having events during the pandemic. So very warm welcome to the series of Landecker seminars. The series is part of the Alfred Landecker Programme at the Blavatnik School of Government here in Oxford. And it's also building on some conversations that have emerged from DAAD-sponsored networks on religion, ethnicity, and politics that stem from my time in Cambridge. Welcome wherever you're from. It's very good to have you with us. Maybe, Joe, would you like to say a few words about the Alfred Landecker Programme, just so that people know what we're up to?
Yeah, so literally just a few words. So we're delighted to have Andreas and Alexander from the Foundation with us. The Alfred Landecker Foundation is set up in memory and honor of Alfred Landecker, who perished in the Holocaust. And the Foundation funds my chair and the program and Marietta's position at the Blavatnik School. You can see the Blavatnik School behind me, and Tobias is virtually sitting in it on our 4th floor, I think, in the school. The program in Oxford is devoted to thinking around issues of minority rights and minority protection, thinking about historical and contemporary questions of how can we better protect minorities in the societies that we now live in. So on that note, I'll just pass back to Marietta. So thank you for coming to this and the opportunity for me just to say a few words about the program and Foundation.
Great, so thank you. So this is the first in a series of Landecker seminars, as I said. Other details will be made available over email as well as on the website of the BSG soon. But for today, we have with us Dr. Luca Ozzano, who is Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Turin in Italy. And he's also the convener of the ECPR Standing Group on Religion and Politics, with lots of exciting events coming up later in the summer. He will speak to us about his new book called The Mask of the Political God, which is a very sophisticated account of the relationship between religious influences in a broader sense and contemporary democratic political parties. So also with us today is Tobias Kramer, who is a junior research fellow at the Religion and the New Frontiers and the Frontiers Challenges at Pembroke College, also here in Oxford. We're delighted to have you with us. So Tobias is an expert on the relationship between religion and right-wing political parties, and recently completed his thesis comparing these very issues in France, Germany, and the United States. So he will offer a response after Luca has spoken to us. If you have questions emerging during these talks, please feel free to start putting them in the chat. We'll try to regroup them for the discussion time and then ask you to restate them live. But this will help us to go maybe a bit less all over the place and to try and create a focused conversation. And then the event will end at 6:30 GMT. That will be 7:30 for some of you. If you want to linger afterwards, that's absolutely fine. But just to give each other an opportunity to step away once we have other duties calling. But without any further ado, Luca, I invite you to speak to us.
Okay, thank you. So first, I would like to thank Marietta and the Blavatnik School of Government for inviting me to participate and actually to present my book in the Landecker seminar. So I'm very happy. Just one moment, I start sharing my slides. Okay, well, something first about my book, which has been published last October, I think, by the Roman and Littlefield in the ECPR Press series. And it is a book which basically gathers more than 15 years of research from my PhD about religious fundamentalist movements in democracies, and my following research is on Turkey, Italy, right-wing populist parties and religion, and so on. So it's everything is inside In this slide, you can see the research design and the structure of the book, where I analyzed 5 cases of which are, as you can see, the most different cases designed, because there are India, Israel, Italy, Turkey, and the US. So each from a different geographic area, from a different culture, with a different religious majority. So my idea was to see if despite all this diversity, there was something similar in the role of religion in party politics. And as the time span from my research, I chose the past 4 decades, since 1980, which is conventionally regarded as a turning point for the return of religion in the public sphere. Of course, I'm aware that this is a controversial concept, but of course, this is conventional, because actually, in most of these cases, this point in time was actually a turning point for the role of religion in party politics. So it fits. And as a theoretical perspective, I adopt first a broader literature on religion, democracy, and political parties, of course. More specifically, I decided to use the literature on cleavages, because I was, as I will show you in a couple of minutes, I was interested in showing the different types of use of religion by political parties. So I also wanted to try to understand what was the reason for these different uses of religion. And so I adopted the literature on cleavages. And I will come back to this in the conclusions. And finally, the book is also based on my typology of religiously oriented parties that I published on the journal Democratization in 2013. Basically, my interest for this field was also because I realized that there were no thorough works, comparative works about the role of religion in party politics. So there were many works about Islamic political parties or single cases or comparisons between 2 cases, but there were no works by a single author comparing different cases around the world. And I think that one of the reasons why the literature about religion and political parties is so flawed is because the concept of religious party itself is flawed. Because if you think about a religious party, you are in a binary world. So a party can be either religious or secular. This creates a lot of problems because the concept is negatively connotated. So many scholars reject the concept itself. So there are a lot of problems. So in 2013, in the special issue where my work was published with Francesco Cavatorta, we elaborated this idea of religiously oriented party, which, in my opinion, allows us to come out of this problem of the binary concept and to single out different degrees, different intensities in the use of religion, and also different types of use of religion associated to different values, to different political programs. So this is the very basis of my work and my research. And so I defined a religious-oriented party as a party where one of these 3 factors appears. So one, that there are explicit religious, the use of religious values in its manifesto, in its political platform. The second is the fact that they make explicit appeals to religious constituencies. The third is the fact that there are significant religious factions within the party. So if there is at least one of these 3 factors, we can say that a party has a religious orientation, which doesn't mean that this is forever. A party can become from secular, it can become religious, as in the case of the Republican Party in the US. Sometimes, and in the case of the Congress Party in India, it can also revert to its previous secular identity. And also, there can be a change of type of religious orientation. And this is basically what I try to understand with my 5 types of religious-oriented parties. And it's very interesting because, well, of course, these are ideal types. Also, in this case, we have hybrid cases, of course. But generally, we can say that the different types have indeed different values, different types of organizations. So, for example, the nationalist parties have often militias, just to make one example. Different types of relations with interest groups, with different types of interest groups. They have different goals. For example, while the fundamentalist religiously-oriented party aims to subvert democracy and create some kind of theocratic regime to make the religious law the law of the state, for example, the other types can coexist with democracy or even support democratic values. And so I identified these 5 types: conservative, progressive, fundamentalist, nationalist, and camp. I think that most of them are quite easy to understand. So conservative is a broad centrist party, including many different identities, and aiming at broadening or defending the role of religion in the public sphere, but accepting democracy. The same for the progressive, which is also associated with a pro-human rights and pro-social rights agenda, which makes it difficult because social orientation and religious identity are not easy to coexist in a political party, at least in many countries. The fundamentalist is a party which aims to subvert the system and create some kind of theocratic regime. The nationalist is a party which associates religion to identity, basically, to some kind of ethnic or nationalist identity, is conflict-oriented, and opposes other identities, other communities. This is particularly important, this type, because in the past we could find it mainly in divided societies like Israel or India. In the past few decades, with religious flows, with immigration flows and other phenomena, there was this development of right-wing populist parties also, where this type of party was previously absent, and so I will come back to this later. The camp party is a party which found its constituency in a specific ethno-religious community. It's different from the nationalist type because it is based on negotiation for its relation. It's not conflictual, but it preserves a community within a pluralist environment. So there is no room, there is no time for to go in depth into the cases. So I just tell you something about my main conclusions. We can talk about the single cases maybe later in the discussion. So first, the reason for the title of my book, why The Masks of the Political God? Actually, in 2013, when I published the article with my model, the title was The Many Faces of the Political God. And now, when I had to choose the title for my book, I decided to change it into The Masks of the Political God, because I think that religion is increasingly becoming a mask, not something related to believing, to going to church or to mosque, related to belonging, but it is it's not related to behaving in some way, but it is related to belonging to a community, which can be real or even imagined in some cases. But this is very important. And another interesting factor is the fact that in politics, religious values are increasingly associated with a right-wing agenda. We can be conservative or nationalist, but in any case, there is this polarization. And this happens also in cases like, for example, Israel or the US, where once there was a significant religious left. And now, to be left-wing means being secular, and to be right-wing means being religious, or at least promote religion, even if you don't believe personally. This is a paradox, but it is often true. And Also, we can see that in terms of types of religiously oriented parties, the nationalist is increasingly predominant. As I was saying before, this was already true in divided societies like Israel and India, but it is a novelty in societies like the Italian, the US, where previously there were no significant strictly nationalist parties with a religious orientation. And why there is this evolution. And what I find particularly interesting is the fact that the language, the policies, the aims of these parties in different parts of the world are increasingly similar. This is quite striking indeed when I found out it. And well, I think that this is related to the fact that these parties are no longer based on the traditional religious cleavage that was defined by Lipset and Roccan. They are based on a different cleavage where religion is part of the struggle between a liberal globalist and a conservative communitarian framework point of view. And of course, this new cleavage has been theorized by several scholars. The most interesting contribution, I think, is the one by Borcher, a Swiss political scientist. In any case, I think that the rise of this new type of parties related to the rise of this new cleavage in society as a consequence, as I mentioned, of globalization, of immigration flows, and other phenomena, as we know. Some more conclusions. Well, another interesting point is the fact that in relation to this new family of parties, the inclusion moderation thesis seems not to be true, because we have at least two cases of parties, the BJP in India and the Lega in Italy, which have been in government for many years, but they have not moderated. At most, they have oscillated between phases of moderation and phases of radicalization, but there is no clear path of moderation, although they have been included. So this is something quite interesting, I think, for the broader literature on political parties. And another point which I find particularly interesting is the fact that populist leaders are often at odds with religious leaders. This is particularly true in my country, in Italy, where there is a harsh cleavage developing in the faithful community itself between right-wing people following right-wing populist parties and centrist and moderate people following the official line of the church. This is increasingly visible, and populist leaders exploit and widen this gap between this polarization. This is quite interesting, and this led to me to think about this phenomenon, and to think about actually what kind of religion they promote. So do they indeed promote religion? Well, if we look at it, in reality, they hijack religious symbols, as Olivier Roy said, for political purposes. They undermine the authority of religious leaders and religious institutions. They in some way trivialize religion because they often are people which don't have a religious lifestyle in many cases, as we know, in the cases of many populist leaders. So my conclusion, which is quite paradoxical and quite provocative, but is that actually these parties might, maybe inadvertently, but they might actually promote secularization and the undermining of religious institutions. But of course, this is just a paradox. I would like also to hear your opinion. I think that time has run out, so I stop for now.
Thank you very much, Luca. That was really fascinating. I'm sure there's lots of questions that people already have. It doesn't matter if you are a student or a well-seasoned researcher, do add them to the chat. Let me invite Tobias to give his response.
Absolutely, and I will also try to share screen with you. And is that working? Yes, very good. Well, thank you very much, Marietta, and really thank you, Luca, for this really fascinating and insightful presentation. Of course, also for the very insightful and fascinating book, which I very much enjoyed reading, and I can really only recommend to all of you to get a copy and actually go through it, because it's actually quite unique in the literature to have this span of different case studies across different regional and cultural contexts, and then also have this theoretical contribution in terms of cleavage theory, but also the typologies of parties. And as Marietta has already mentioned, my research does intersect in very interesting ways with what Luca was just talking about. So my research focuses in particular on what Luca would call the nationalist type of the party, on right-wing populists and their relationship with religion in Western Europe and North America. My case studies were Germany, France, and the United States. And in this context, I very much addressed 4 questions. First, here we go, if it moves, there we go. First, what are the social origins of right-wing populism? A very similar approach in a way to Luca, so I won't spend too much time on that. And then I also looked at how right-wing populists actually use religion, how that also works out within the party, what sort of debates there are. And then how does this work out in practice? How do Christian voters and communities actually react to these identitarian references to religion by the populist right? And then finally, what does this mean for the role of the church in society? And how do, on the one hand, mainstream political parties, and specifically mainstream religiously oriented political parties and their use of religion on the one hand, and then church leaders' behavior on the other hand, how do these factors shape right-wing populists' ability to use religion for in a political way? And I have looked at that for that purpose, at a lot of electoral studies and quantitative data, but maybe for today's conversation, most interestingly, perhaps I also did about 120 elite interviews with right-wing populist leaders, mainstream party politicians, and church officials in Germany, France, and the United States over the last couple of years. And since Luca has already talked about the sources of right-wing populism, and my findings very much go in the same direction, I will really try and focus now on giving you a bit of these empirical details from the interviews, and then also have a bit of a closer look of religious communities' responses and the role of churches and mainstream parties. So as to the insights from the interviews as to the use of right-wing populists of religion, I have come to very similar conclusion in that right-wing populists seem to really use reference religion primarily as a cultural identity marker, and very often specifically against Islam. So they use Christian symbols, they would use Christian language, but increasingly remain distant from Christian values, beliefs, and institutions. So very much a culturalization of religion, perhaps even a secularization, to pick up on Luca's formulation. Religion here really only as a way of identifying the national community, in a way dissociation of belief and belonging of religion as a faith from religion as a cultural identifier. And I could see that very clearly in the interviews themselves. So one of the questions that I asked all of my interviewees is, how do you actually define Christian identity? And it was quite striking to see the difference, because when I asked that question to mainstream party politicians or church leaders, they would usually start talking about theology, about sinfulness, the Trinity, the resurrection, etc. By contrast, when I asked the very same question to right-wing populist leaders, they would usually start talking about things like architecture, music, history, tradition, even geography. And crucially, almost all of them would also start referencing Islam. So I gave you here just 3 quotes that are actually quite representative from right-wing populist leaders. So one AfD politician told me that very clearly in the AfD, the consensus is that when we say Christian, we mean that, or Occident, we mean that in a historical and cultural terms rather than theological terms. It's about defending our culture against another civilization and the threat of Islam. One leader of the Front National told me that for her, the religious question will necessarily be central, but it will be in relation to the question of political Islam. And perhaps in relation to political Islam, there might be a will to defend what defines us. And when it comes to what defines us, well, then it's hard to avoid Christian identity. But she also confirmed that for her and for most in her party, that meant rather something cultural than religious. And interestingly, even in the United States, which tends to be much more religious, one leading member of the Trump campaign told me quite openly that for them, taking back control doesn't mean Christianity in the way that it meant in the 80s. Now it means nationalism. It's less religious. It's more political. There's no doubt about that. So we really see here this focus on identity much rather than on faith. But what is perhaps even more interesting was that when I dug a bit deeper, I actually saw and encountered quite a lot of division within these right-wing populist parties about religion more broadly. And specifically, I also encountered, in opposition to this identitarian use of religion, very strong, explicitly anti-Christian currents in many of these parties. So to just give you a few more quotes, one AfD official told me that there are many people in the AfD who outwardly say that Christianity is extremely important to them, and that they are Christians themselves, but who internally have always fought the Christians within the party. They really wanted to destroy us. For these people, Christianity is really a religion from the Near East that does not fit into Germany. Other politicians, one in the Front National, told me that as a Christian, the Christian contingent became so marginalized in the Front National that for him, it was a drama of conscience because he felt he was denied to voice his opinion. And even in the US, a member of Trump's faith advisory, actually several members of Trump's faith advisory board told me about clashes between the new, much more secular populist right, and then on the other hand, the traditional religious right. So one of them telling me that Steve Bannon was trying to get some evangelicals out of the White House, and that in turn evangelicals were trying to get him out of the White House. Now the question is, of course, how does the strategy actually work out in practice? And it's really interesting that if we look at voting behavior, in particular in Western Europe, we can actually see that these identitarian references to religion appear most successful amongst cultural Christians or irreligious voters, whereas practicing Christians remain, in fact, comparatively immune. Some scholars speak of a religious vaccination effect against against the populism among religious voters. So I give you here, just as an example, numbers in Germany, where we can see that the AfD is on average double as strong amongst irreligious Germans than there are amongst Protestants and Catholics, but we can see similar developments in France or in the Netherlands. Of course, in the US, it's much more complicated because Trump did so extremely well among white evangelicals. But even there, we could see that in 2016 in the primaries, he actually did best among those evangelicals who never attend church, whereas he significantly underperformed among frequent churchgoers. Now, we still, and that then of course raises the question, are we really seeing a handmaiden's tale in the United States, a resacralization of politics, or not rather a secularization of what used to be the Christian right, and maybe a shift from a faith-driven religious right to a much more race-driven identitarian and post-religious right? Now, the question is, of course, how do then, what determines how Christian voters do end up? And I'll end on that as just the last minute. But very briefly, I found that really church leaders and mainstream party politicians can play quite important role in a way shaping the ability of right-wing populist leaders to use religion, because on the one hand, we could see that mainstream party politicians are important to the extent that whether there is the availability of a Christian alternative in a way. So here the logic is that Christian voters, practicing Christian voters, are actually traditionally much more bound to what Luca would call conservative Christian parties, and that if such an electoral alternative is available, then these voters are unavailable for the populist right. But if such an alternative is lacking or taken over by the populist right, then this gap disappears. And then the second and perhaps most overlooked factor in the literature is that behind this religion gap seems really to be the behavior of the institutional churches, in particular, their willingness to create and maintain social taboos around the populist right. So if we have churches that are openly and vehemently speaking out against the populist right, they seem to be capable of raising the social costs of association with right-wing populist parties among many of their congregants, and thereby contribute to this religious immunity in a way. Conversely, if faith leaders are for whatever reason unable or unwilling to speak out against the populist right, this vaccination effect appears to break down. I'm aware that I'm running out of time, so I'll leave the questions up here and look forward to the discussion. And stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Tobias. Really enlightening, and I think rightly your research has a lot in common, I think, with Luca's, and just thank you to both. Can we give both Luca and Tobias maybe a round of applause? Great. So as we go into a time of discussion, I invite you to keep adding any questions in the chat. I'm noticing that particular students haven't really asked any questions yet. So if you feel like you have a question, please do come in. You're as welcome as everyone else. Just to repeat that, maybe let's start with a couple of definitional questions that have been raised. I'm wondering, maybe Joe, you could ask your question about what the definition of like the camp concept, and maybe combine that with some of the questions of John on the left wing.
Okay, thank you. So thank you both. Really enlightening, and so much there that we, need to think about a lot more, because so much is new to me. And one of the things that is new, Luca, on, I think it was your third slide, you had conservative, progressive, fundamentalist, nationalist, and camp as categories. And to me, camp was rather the odd one out here, because I think I could have had a go at defining the other categories for myself. But the term camp was new to me. Excuse me, I'm not part of this literature, so perhaps it's a term better known to scholars within the field. But if you could say a little bit more about what that is and how it is distinguished from the other groups, I would benefit from that. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question, because I'm aware that it is the less familiar of those categories. Actually, it is a category that I met while studying the religious right in Israel, and particularly it was proposed by a scholar who's named Asher Cohen, who used this concept of camp party to define, for example, the ultra-Orthodox parties in Israel, which are parties which are specifically based on a community, which can be either religious or ethno-religious, or they receive most of their votes from that community, and they basically act as interest groups defending that community, and that they are political parties. So they are completely overlapped with the community and that identity. But the difference from the nationalist type, there are basically two differences. One is that the nationalist type in some cases can defend an identity which can also be an imagined identity, while the camp party is based on a real community, which often is physically separated from the other communities, like in Israel, for example. And the other is that they negotiate the privilege of that community rather than having a conflict-oriented attitude. This does not mean that they cannot change. For example, in Israel, there is this literature about nationalization of the ultra-Orthodox parties, which are becoming more conflict-oriented, for example. But to talk about the type, and so I started to look at the other types, and I found out that, for example, also in India, there are parties of this type. For example, the Shiromani Akali Dal is a party based on the Sikh community in India. There are also some small local Muslim parties which have this kind of outlook. And so I thought that I should include it in my model, although it's less frequent than other types, but it's I think it's something different actually. So it was worth its own category, I think.
Thank you. I mean, it does make sense, I think. So, the ultra-Orthodox in Israel and wouldn't fit your definition of fundamentalist, I don't think, because I don't believe they feel there should be a union of the church and state. So, but how wide it is as a category, how many other fall into that. So you mentioned India, but it'd be interesting to see if there are other religious groups that are in some sense political, but don't want to have a religious state. So thank you.
I think this ties in really well with the question that Andreas and Paul were asking. So maybe if we could put those before we go to the left-wing parties. Andreas, would you like to state your question, maybe in relation to what was just said?
First of all, really, I like to thank you, Marietta, for creating this wonderful panel. Also, Luca and Tobias for the really enlightening statements. I'm not an expert in this at all. So first of all, I was really impressed that you cover a period of 40 years and different religions, different groups. So this gives me really a reason to read your book, because I think this is really a challenge. Secondly, I'm struggling with the fact that here, at least in Germany, we are living in a country, in a community where religion played an important role, but this is really fading away. But the most important, the most powerful party in Germany is defining itself as Christian Democrats. So by name, they are a religious party, but the role of religion really mostly has faded away. But on the other hand, we have very important groups, and these are not Christian groups. So the migrants, mostly Muslims, 15–90%, where religion plays a much more important role than in the rest of the community. So as Paul, I'm struggling with the question of belonging and belief. And as the figures really stated, that mostly people are the populists and right-wing extremists or right-wingers are most successful in groups where people are not going to services, probably don't have any connection. So I'm just seeing your broad issues, your broad topics, and I think for me it would be very important really to specify the details and the differences between those religious parties, religion, things like that. But I'm just interested in how do you see the differences, and if it's really like religion has become a mask for everyone.
Paul, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, thank you, Marietta. Just I looked back at my screenshot of your slide, Luca, and I noticed that you had belief and behavior were two contrast cases with belonging. Tobias's commentary focused mostly on sort of Christian nationalist parties, so it makes sense that belief was the focus in the commentary. But I would like to hear more about how behavior falls away compared to belonging, and whether the dynamic looks the same within some of these non-Christian majority countries that you study. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. Behavior, well, it used to be very important because, for example, as you know, in Christian societies, Christian majority societies, people Christians used to define themselves, to distinguish themselves, for example, from communists. I think about Italy until the 1970s, by going to church on Sunday, by attending services. So this is a dimension which is very important. We can say that many people, especially in the middle class, already had a formal way of living religion, but attending, for example, religious services was still very important. Now it is no longer so important. Also, as you mentioned, the fact that many people who vote for right-wing populist parties are not people who attend regularly the church. In Italy, they even coined a new definition of pious atheists, because there are some people who personally don't believe even, but they support right-wing parties and support conservative Christianity because they think that religion is important for our identity and to defend ourselves from the Muslim invasion, inverted commas, and even if they don't think religion is something real. So this is quite important, and it is important also in relation to the previous question to single out the traditional conservative religious parties based on the religious cleavage defined by Lifset and Rocken, and the new parties, the new populist parties, because in the first case we have parties where at least in terms of social behavior, behaving was important. Now it's only identity that's important. This is what defines this new type of party. So identity, Christianity, or maybe in Turkey, Islam, or is my identity, is part of my identity, is something important to make me different from people who invade my country. And so this is, I think, that the most important point to understand these parties and the people who vote for them. But I don't think it is only a mask, actually, because I am also quite critical. I'm aware that by using the metaphor of the mask, I can be, maybe I look like a person who thinks about that it is all about instrumentalization of religion. But indeed, I think that there is also many people who actually believe what they are doing. For example, about Italy, there is some recent literature about the new Catholic movements, which indeed, they try to promote a real religious agenda through the populist party. So, according to some scholars, it is the new Catholics movement who are exploiting the populist party, not the opposite. I'm still not sure about what the situation is because I'm still thinking about it, but I find it very fascinating, a very fascinating perspective.
I'm sure I maybe shouldn't put anyone on the spot, but Matthias, I might bring you in on some of this topic at some point. But could I invite you, Luca, to say something about the differences between religions, but also within religions, and how they relate to this cleavage network? Maybe just coming back to the question that Andreas asked.
Sorry, there was a problem with the connection. Can you repeat the question, please?
Andreas, would you like to restate your question on the differences between religion and within religion?
I'm not sure if I really can elaborate on this, because I'm just thinking about if there are any differences, because you're covering so much different environments, so much different religions. I very much like your definition of the camp, or the usage, like Joe Wolf asked about this. So this is something I very much experienced in Israel, how this camp is a kind of, it's like a community around the campfire. Yeah, sorry, Marietta, I lost the track. So
it's okay.
Yeah,
I think what my understanding.
I read the question in the chat. So it was about the difference between among different religions and the relation with parties. It was that.
Yeah, you know, if you're taking the example of Israel, which is mainly regarding to the ultra-Orthodox, the Haredim, and their, let's say, their influence. If you're talking about Turkey, this is the new Islamic movement. So I'm not an expert in India at all, but Hinduism is and then you have Christianity. Actually, yeah, I'm like Tobias. We're concentrating on Christianity. We're talking about the new rights in the US, the influence. By the way, also here in Eastern Germany, beside the AfD, we have regions in Saxonia where the fundamental religions are very, very influential. And they're getting more and more influence. But I see this is so different, and I'm asking myself, as I said it before, do you probably you see also those differences, or you're just taking this as the title imposes as a mask? So under the coverage of religion, right-wingers, right-wing extremists, or populists, or for me, let's say people who are fighting democracy are using this. So far, sorry.
Yeah, it's very clear. It depends on what you look at, because if you look at the issues put forward by the parties, there are radical differences, of course. If you look at the US, it's abortion, prayer in schools. If you look at India, it's co-slaughtering, places of worship. It's about rewriting textbooks and so on. If you look at Israel, it's there is a lot of discourse on the land, defending the sacred places and so on. But so if you look at this level, there are radical differences. But if you look at the behavior of parties, at their model of organization, at the style of their leaders in rhetorical terms and in policy terms, there are striking similarities. If you look at Narendra Modi in India, or Erdogan in Turkey, or Salvini in Italy, Trump in the US, of course, they say different things, they defend different values, we agree on that. But their behavior, their political style are so similar, really it's striking.
If I could maybe just briefly add on that, because I think it's really, I mean, and this is mainly for Western Europe, but when it becomes so complicated about like to what extent are these people really religious, and it is actually quite important to emphasize there is a wing of Christian fundamentalists in most of these parties, especially so obviously in the US. But I think what is one really interesting development that we can see, and I think that cleavage theory in a way is very useful, is that we see in a way a schism within the right-wing electorate, and I think that often gets overseen by academics, because we just see in a way they're opposed to secular liberalism. But they're actually two different rights. On the one hand, we have the traditional religious right that also is demographically different, because these voters often tend to be more middle class, more educated, socially conservative. They care about abortion and gay marriage. But much more associated with traditional conservative parties, and also church-going, and they listen in a way to religious authority. And then we are also seeing, and that is more new, this new secular right in a way that tends to be demographically often more of the white working class electorate, which now is actually the most secular electorate within many Western countries. And they tend to care less about these religious issues, but they are much more about identitarian issues like immigration, race relations, etc. And what is interesting, and then comes into play in a way also the offer of parties. If we are in a multi-party system, then these two rights would probably go into two different parties. But if we are in a two-party system, then these two groups can form coalitions, and then it gets a bit complicated. And then you also have to look within parties how these conflicts are. So that was, I think, the interesting bit in the US, that we really see within the Republican Party now this fight between the old Christian right and then the new secular right. in a way clashing. So I think that's just maybe to add to that dynamics, and we see similar developments in Germany and other countries. It's like within the right, there's more nuance than many of us may think.
Thank you so much for that. I think when we speak about differentiation on a political spectrum, I think one expression that often gets forgotten is religion that's used on the left wing. And I wonder if John might want to state this question and maybe comment a bit on the context of that.
Well, thank you for the very interesting contributions, Tobias and Luca. The question is just a simple one. You have talked a lot about right-wing populism and the use of that ideology in politics, but I wonder whether there is any left-wing movement as well. And also maybe a more general question, which is not particularly related to this. What is the ultimate aim of these political parties? Do they want to impose some form of theocracy? But from what you have already said, it seems that there's a lot of divergence in depending on which parties and which religious groups you're looking at.
Okay, thank you, John, for the question, because indeed, to me, the left-wing religiously oriented parties may be the most fascinating category, because they are so, they are, at first, I think, very idealist people, and but they live in so many contradictions, because if you wanted to promote a social agenda in progressive terms, of course, in politics, and also a religious agenda, you have a lot of problems, because in the political left, they don't accept you because you are religious, and the political left is becoming increasingly secular. And in the political right, they don't accept you because you have progressive ideas on human rights, on social issues. So it is a mess for you. And actually, some years ago at the United Nations, I had the opportunity to meet an Israeli rabbi who had been the leader of Meimad, who had been the main left-wing religious Zionist part. So they were Zionist, nationalist, religious, but left-wing in terms of human rights and social rights. And they virtually disappeared. They entered the Labour Party, and then they virtually disappeared. They no longer exist. And this is so, we can also find the religious left, at least in two of the cases I analyzed, which are the US and Italy. So in the US, there was this strong religious left, which also stemmed from the civil rights movements, Martin Luther King, and so on. But they have so many problems to fit in the Democratic Party, which has become so secular, so hardliner in defining, for example, the legislation about abortion, which is more extreme in the US than in many European countries, but they are so secular in this. So religious people in the Democratic Party have many problems. And also in Italy, there was this strong tradition of religious left, the social orientation of the church. And you asked if they aim at create some kind of theocratic society. It depends, because in some cases they are also liberal in religious terms, so they are moderates. In other cases, they are not. So, for example, in Italy, after the Second World War, there was a current of within Christian democracy, a very strong faction, which was inspired by the social doctrine of the church. So they were very progressive in terms of social rights, but they were also very fundamentalist in religious terms. So this is something quite interesting, I think. But in most cases, they tend to be moderate in this field, and they tend to try to pursue a religious orientation, so to defend the role of religion in the public sphere while advancing a progressive agenda on human rights and social rights. But it is usually a problem to do both things at the same time. And so this is what explains the fact that these parties don't live for a long time, because they are often, they have a very strong conflict within themselves and with other parties to find alliances. So this is why the Meimad in Israel disappeared, why the Margherita Party, which in Italy in the early 2000s got 15% of the votes. It was a left-wing, mildly religiously oriented party, and then became part of the Democratic Party of Italy. So they are fascinating parties, but they have a lot of problems to exist and to thrive.
Thank you, Luca. I wonder perhaps about this question of the instrumentalization of religion. I think Louise asked a question about that in the chat. Louise, would you like to comment on that?
Yes, please. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much for the presentation and comments. Much appreciated. My question is, I think, because I'm studying especially on the roles of new social imaginaries, and I'm a young professor at McGill. I'm working on Charles Taylor work too, and Charles Taylor spoke of us as about the new secular age and new social imaginaries. And it's striking me that you may understand from the relation between religion and politics, you may understand from the point of view of religion, it's regards to politics, it's a part of a social imaginary, and it's mainly a question of identity. But if we can take, on the other hand, on the part of political parties, on political sphere, the relationship between politics and religion became as an instrumental one. That is, politics tend to instrumentalize religion and identities to their own agendas. And my question is, do you agree with this provocative statement? I think it's a provocative statement. I made myself clear.
Thank you, Lewis. I wonder if maybe Tobias could comment on this as well. I don't know if Luca and Tobias want to who of you would like to start, but I think it would be worth having both of your opinions on this.
Okay, Tobias, you can start if you want.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think not entirely sure. So you're basically, I'm not entirely sure I got the question quite right. So you're saying it's either part of a social imaginary, and otherwise it is only instrumental.
Yeah, from the point of view of religion communities, I think it's a question of identity. When religion communities intend to politics, they tend to make claims about identity. When politics take religion into their agenda, they take it religion and instrumental frames.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Sorry. Yeah. No, I think that's interesting, and I think there is something to it. It is obviously a question of directionality. So of course, in a way, if you think of religious communities, for them, politics is instrumental. So say a Christian Democratic Party in the 1920s might have been instrumental for Catholics in Germany. But what I think we are, and it is about identity. And I think one important distinction we need to make is not that, say, traditional Christian Democratic parties are not about identity. They are just about beliefs and the Trinity and theology. That's not true. Where I think is a clear difference is that traditional conservative parties or traditional Christian Democratic parties always made a point of saying this is about belonging and identity, as well as about defending, exactly as you say, the interests of Christian institutions, Christian doctrine, etc. So they, in a way, put this together. And I think what we are seeing is, in a way, in this way, the conservative parties would instrumentalize religion because they would capitalize on that electorate. but also that in a way Christians in the church would instrumentalize these parties in having them as defenders of their interests. Now, what is interesting about the populist right is that this relationship does not quite exist to the same extent. So in a way, they get rid of the representation of Christian institutions and Christian values and Christian beliefs, and only say we are only about identity. And they are often very clear about that and saying, I mean, a lot of the right-wing populist leaders I talked to said, like, oh, no, of course we don't believe in God. Of course we don't like the church. And a lot of them would actually say, and that was a really striking feature, both in Germany and France and even in the US, that they would usually call for much more secularist organization of state-church relations. So in Germany, they would tell me, oh, actually, we need like a laicite style. These bishops have too much power. Religious education in schools is bad. We have to take that out, and we have to move the church out of politics. They shouldn't get involved in politics at all. So almost a quite hostile anti-clericalism that has been there. So in a way, these parties really aren't instruments of faith communities anymore. And in France, it's, I mean, the Front National talks as much about laicite, secularism, as they do about Christian or Catholic identity. So I think in a way that's new, this dissociation of really saying, okay, we only care about these Christian symbols, and clearly saying actually, but these Christian symbols have nothing to do with Christian institutions or Christian doctrine or clericalism, is a way redefinition of what do we mean with religion in secular societies. And maybe it's the definition that we need to have to say, is religion still for us something about belief and the institution of the church, or has religion really become for us in a way a symbol and a cultural aspect that's just part of, if I'm German, I'm somewhat Christian, even if I'm atheist, if that makes sense.
Okay, I agree with most of what Tobias said. I'm afraid that Tobias and I will never have a very interesting discussion because we agree on virtually everything. So, but personally, I tend to be a constructivist. So I agree that when you use religion in politics, it's always part of a social imaginary. So I think that, Alfred Stepan got it right when he talked about multivocality of religions. So in a religious tradition, you can find different tools that you can use for different political purposes. So even if maybe there is a true interpretation of a religion in theological terms, I had very interesting discussion with Catholic scholars about this. But in politics, this is not true. There is not a true version of Christianity or Islam in politics. There are different uses. And but I think that I agree with Tobias on the fact that there are different uses, and not necessarily one is more true than another, one is identity, the other is not. Of course, also in Christian democratic parties, there were many people who were not personally religious, probably, and so this is not the different. There is one point that I forgot to mention before, but I think it's very important, is the fact that you define your identity also in relation to who or what is your opponent. So for Christian democratic parties, maybe the conflict dimension was less important. But if there was an opponent, it was secular people, the communists, the socialists, people wanting to reduce the role of religion. For right-wing populist parties, the enemy is the other. Usually it is Islam, in Europe at least, or the US. And so this is also the different use of religion, and also, in some cases, the different use of secularity, because you can also exploit the secular is not only religion. And you can see it very clearly when the same people in European right-wing populist parties are very religious when it's about to defend Christian traditions. And suddenly, when they refer to Islam, they become very secular. Oh, we must defend the European tradition, the Western tradition, which is secular. We have our rights. We must defend Jewish people, homosexuals. They suddenly start becoming very, very liberal people, apparently. So this is something that we must think about. So there is a social imaginary, yes, and it is defined also very strongly by who is the opponent that is singled out by a party. This is very important, I think.
Thank you very much.
I think that very much relates to Alex's comment, but I see that Matthijs has his hand up. So maybe Matthijs, could you come in first, and then we'll have Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Marietta. Yeah, so if I ramble a bit, please apologize beforehand. So what I would like to kind of draw attention to as a part of the discussion is the inner Christian dilemma that's followed out of the collapse of the ecumenical movement. So as you all may or may not know, the movement towards greater Christian unity that really got an enormous boost in the 1960s, but then reached about its zenith about 1995. So what I observe as a religious scholar myself and somewhat of a political scientist in US and Canada is really the deep uncertainty that at least from my perspective, appears to underlie the movement of religious groups in the current landscape. I mean, there is no explanatory narrative available to justify and explain the differences between Catholics and Protestants and why one should be a Christian in the first place. So it seems to me that religious groups try to shield themselves from the challenge to shield themselves from the force of this dilemma, because it's kind of relegates themselves into a form of particularism, and by and large they have done that through resorting to more conservative positions. So I think there is an intra-religious dynamic that I think is worth pursuing. So in this, I was reminded of the historical study of James Chappell on Catholic Modern, on the trajectory of the Catholic Church from ultra-traditionalist under Pius X in the beginning of the 20th century to a much more progressive, well, no, not progressive, but a much more world-open viewpoint at the Second Vatican Council, under the influence of John Courtney Murray and his theories on democracy, very much inspired by the American context. But since then, the association of Catholics and democracy, Christians and democracy, that was extremely strong for so long, has really, it seems, kind of disintegrated in a way. So I just wanted to bring this in. Please comment.
Okay, if I got your question right, I think that this is a very challenging issue for religious institutions and religious organizations today, because, as I said before, also, for example, in Italy, there is a growing divide in the believers community itself, and also how you relate to, for example, the relations between Catholics and Protestants. It's very important also because in many cases these new right-wing populist parties are becoming very ecumenical in their own way. So in the US there are conservative Catholics and conservative Protestants, conservative Jews, and some conservative Muslims, I think, even that support these political positions, because also I think this is also related to the cleavage, to different cleavages. So scholars say that there is this new values cleavage which has become more important than the old denominational cleavage, which was Catholics vote Democratic, Protestants vote Republican, and so on. So this is becoming very important. And I think this is also connected to what I was saying before, that in many cases the populist leaders are becoming are trying to become religious leaders in their own right. And this is, I think, for example, also a very interesting case that we haven't talked about so far, the Turkish case, where Erdogan is portraying himself as a kind of religious leaders, and this is also facilitated by the fact that there is a state of organization of religion. So they have hundreds of mosques under state control. They can appoint the preachers and so on. So indeed, the prime minister has a religious role as a religious leader. So they compete with religious organizations to define what being a Christian, being a good Muslim, being a good Protestant means. And this is an enormous challenge for churches and for religious organizations. And I think they will have to cope with this in the coming years. Yeah.
Thank you. Alexander, would you like to come in?
Thank you so much for both of your presentations. Also from my side, I was very much thinking about that a few days ago. I spoke to two activists that are part of the LGBTQI communities in Poland and Hungary, and they are increasingly discriminated against and are trying to kind of engage for their communities. And they, in both countries, they really face this political kind of dynamics against these communities, driven by the so-called defense of Christian values. So really kind of using is really as an example of what you both were describing. So my question, I think, primarily goes to you, Luca. So if I understood you correctly, you're saying that the religious practices are not so much relevant anymore because they are more used as identity markers. And although I do agree and kind of understand and share that religious kind of religion is more used as an identity marker by populist movements, I'm not sure if really the religious practices are not so relevant anymore. And I ask this question because I see that many religious practices are in many cases really inherently hostile to minorities. So this is only to some parts of religious practices. I want to be respectful also I'm not generalizing here, but to give an example, the Catholic Church is also in its religious practices very hostile to LGBTQI communities, to give this example. So they are really much rejecting those lifestyles. And of course, I think this practice of rejecting this lifestyle in its kind of everyday religious practice as an institution, this is of course kind of a good fertile breeding ground to then translate this as populist movements to public policy. So I wonder if these religious practices are still important as a reference, as a trait to which you can kind of refer to, and I think this is probably, I would assume this is still the case, although the churches might even officially denounce themselves from populist movements, if still their practices very much kind of are living this minority hostile behavior in some regards. Then of course it's not so important if the official leaders are rejecting the policies that are minority hostile. So that's my question.
So, I understand your question, but can you explain more in details which religious practices are hostile towards the LGBT community? I don't understand very well.
Yeah, maybe I also don't understand to 100% your idea and definition of religious practice, but I would say the norm, to stay with this example, the norm that the Catholic Church is setting, that a marriage has to be between a man and a woman. So excluding, for example, homosexual marriages, I would assume that's also a religious practice to really define how kind of this institution as a marriage, this sacred good has to look like. So they kind of, by setting this norm, they exclude lifestyles that don't fit into this norm.
Okay, thank you. Now it's clear. Yeah, this is quite interesting, and actually, I wrote some papers about the relation between religion, populism, and gender issues because, well, I had written a previous book about religion-related debates in Italy, and so I had become very interested in this issue, and so I followed also the debate when in Italy in 2016 they approved a law legalizing same-sex unions because Italy was the last Western European country to approve such a law. So it was very interesting, and this is an issue which is quite thorny because while on other issues like immigration, multiculturalism, attitude towards religious minorities, the differences between right-wing populist parties and religious communities are quite evident in relation to well, not only gender issues, but also broadly speaking, sexuality issues, morality issues. The differences are less striking. There might be a difference in language, in tone, for example, with the church only stigmatizing behaviors and political leaders also stigmatizing people. So, for example, in Italy, right-wing populist leaders adopted a very politically incorrect language towards homosexuals in still 10 or 15 years ago. And so this is a point where the churches and also religious centrists and religious moderates find more difficult to mark their distance from populists. And so this is a problem also for the political left because it is a wedge issue in the left. For example, in Italy and but in other countries, we have in the left also people with a religious sensitivity. And if you talk about these issues, there can be a divide within the left. And this is also what explains why in Italy it was so difficult to approve a law on same-sex unions. And they are still discussing a law punishing homophobic crimes because there are, even in the central left, there are Catholics who want to defend free speech. So if they approve this law, we will not be able to say that we have one model of family. And so this is, so I agree with what you say, but it's a matter of defining what we define a religious practice. What you said is, I define it more as theology, but in practical terms, I agree with you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think Tobias would like to respond to this as well.
Yeah. So I mean, like I completely agree with Luca on that, but I even take it a step further and really remind us that we are talking here that these that in a way the church and traditional conservative parties are about a different cleavage than these new right-wing populist parties in many cases. So actually, what is interesting is that we can see that just because right-wing populist parties we see them as far right doesn't necessarily mean that they need to be more right-wing on every issue. If we actually look more closely to countries like Germany, France, the Netherlands, but even the US, we actually see that right-wing populist parties there are, yes, much more right-wing when it comes to identitarian issues like immigration, like race relations, etc., etc. But they're actually more liberal in many ways when it comes to LGBT rights, when it comes to women rights, etc. Because that's not what they care about. You will actually see the Front National in France is very big about saying we are the real defenders of gay rights. Sébastien Chenu, who's the general secretary, he organizes the gay pride in Marseille, and they're saying actually we are defending these liberal left-wing values. I mean, if you look at the Netherlands, it's a similar thing. So it's counterintuitive, but actually in some issues, this populist right is more liberal than the churches or traditional Christianity. But this is because they are catering to a different cleavage. So this is what we are also trying to say. This is a different right-wing population. If you look at Trump's voters, for instance, they are much more hostile to racial minorities. They are much more hostile to immigration. But they're actually much more open towards gay marriage. They don't really care about gay marriage. In the worst case scenario, they will even say we defend gay marriage against Muslims. So trying to see this in a way complication within the right, that these different organizations and groups cater to very different positions. It's I think important to recognize, especially in Western Europe. I mean, Eastern Europe is also more complicated, but just as a little add-on.
Thanks.
If I may, I'd like to add something, because I think that indeed right-wing populist parties are based on this idea that there is some kind of homogeneous national or Western community, and there are the others that you are opposed to. And I think that there are differences also depending on the nationalist tradition of a country. So, for example, in French, in the Netherlands, there is a more secular nationalist tradition. In Italy, we have, or in some Eastern European countries, for example, we have a nationalist tradition which is imbued with religious values. So when a party is positioned on the right, automatically must be very religious in relation to some issues. While if there is a conception of nationalism which is more secular, you are more free to adopt a different point of view and to include maybe even homosexuals, but also Jews or other groups within the us against the others. If you are very religious because of the national tradition of your culture and so on, homosexuals are among the others and not among us. And so this, I think, is very important to explain these differences Tobias was talking about.
Great. And I think in the next session, we will talk a lot more about how religious communities relate to politics. I think I would like to make space for one final question, which was posed by Dara, which is offering a contrast to some of the case studies that Luca has offered us. And maybe it's also a good reminder of how the theory is still context-based, even if we're comparing quite a lot of areas. Dara, would you like to say anything about your question?
Yeah, thank you, Marietta. I'm sorry for the video. I have low bandwidth now. So to Lucas, yeah, you said that the religious party tend to be nationalist as well. But from where I'm coming from, Indonesia, I observe a different trend, which the religious party, which is the Islamic one, tend to be the opposite of the nationalist party, you know, the party who fight for the minority rights and pluralism and so on and so forth. So I wonder what's your take on this alliance between the nationalism and religious? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Well, first, I don't know very well the Indonesian case, so I know something about it, of course, but I didn't went in depth into it, so I can't be very specific. But as far as I know, the struggle for independence was led by secular leaders, I think. Am I right?
It's a mix of both. There are some like Islamic leaders as well in the independence fight.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Also, because in many cases, when as I said before, if nationalism is defined in secular terms, is more it's easier for religious people not to be religious. I think also to remind us that models are just models, so there are differences also related to cultures. I think that in Islam there is also a strong internationalist tradition related to the belief that the Ummah is the real point of reference for real believers. And so this is something that also that goes against nationalism. And this might also be a factor related to the Islamic culture, as far as we can talk about the Islamic culture.
Yeah, so yeah, I think that's one of the variables that we can consider about the transnationalism culture in Islam, because that's what happened in Indonesia. You know, the Islamic party tend to be seen as something that is not being originated from Indonesia. It's from Arab, and it tried to bring like another culture to Indonesia against the nationalist group in Indonesia. Yeah, so I think that's one of variables that explains it.
I think that Indonesia also is a very diverse country with different ethnic groups, like, for example, also India. So you can find many different types of religious orientations. Some cases, for example, supporting democracy, in other cases opposing it. So this is quite also important, the internal differences within a religious tradition. Yeah.
Great.
Thank you.
That, of course, brings us back to something that Andreas brought up earlier. I think I would like to thank our two panelists and everyone for all their contributions today. This was really a wonderful conversation. I would like to mention that our next event is going to be on the 2nd of March with Professor Jocelyn Cesari from the University of Birmingham and a response by Professor Philip Gorski from Yale University. And this should be really, really interesting because we'll be zooming in on what religious communities are doing themselves in relation with to nationalism, but primarily from the perspective of religious communities.